Yasharaj was the old god that made all the others look like amateur hour. This thing was so massive, so powerful, and so deeply rooted in Azeroth that even other old gods probably looked at him and thought, yeah, that guy's the boss. He had 7 heads, each one representing a different negative emotion, and he could literally drain courage from heroes and breathe pure fear into their souls. While the other old gods worked through manipulation and corruption, Yasharaj was more direct. He didn't need to hide in shadows or whisper sweet nothings into people's ears. He was strong enough to just dominate through raw power. The guy controlled the largest portion of the Black Empire and had turned most of southern Kalimdor into his personal kingdom of nightmares. His servants, the Mantid, weren't just random bug people either. They were a perfectly organized swarm that followed the old god's will without question. Every 100 years, they'd launch massive attacks against the Pandaren, not because they were evil, but because conflict and struggle fed Yasharaj's power. Negative emotions were literally his food source. But here's where the Titans made the biggest mistake in cosmic history. Aman'Thul, the leader of the Pantheon, looked at this situation and decided that enough was enough. The other keepers and Titanforge were making progress against C'Thun, Yogg-saron, and N'Zoth, but Yasharaj was too powerful for them to handle. So Aman'Thul said, fine, I'll do it myself, reached down from space and ripped Yasharaj out of Azeroth like pulling a weed from a garden. And honestly, it worked. Yasharaj died instantly. The most powerful old god in Azeroth's history was gone in a single move. Victory. Wrong. So incredibly wrong. See, Yasharaj had been on Azeroth for so long that his roots had grown deep into the world's core. When Aman'Thul yanked him out, he didn't just remove the old god. He created a wound so massive it nearly killed the sleeping Titan soul. The hole left behind was enormous, a gaping crater that went straight down toward the world's heart. And from that wound, pure arcane energy began flowing upward, creating what would eventually become the Well of Eternity. The Well of Eternity became the most important location in Azeroth's history. It was the source of magic for the Night Elves, the reason they became immortal, and eventually the target of the Burning Legion's first invasion. All because the Titans tried to take the quick and easy solution to the old god problem. Every major catastrophe in Warcraft history can be traced back to that moment when Aman'Thul decided to rip Yasharaj out of the ground. But wait, it gets worse. Yasharaj didn't just die quietly. As he was being torn from Azeroth, his death scream shattered his essence into 7 distinct pieces. These became the Shah, pure manifestations of negative emotion that settled in what would later be called Pandaria. The Shah of pride, the Shah of anger, the Shah of fear, the Shah of hatred, the Shah of doubt, the Shah of despair, and the Shah of violence. Each one became a lingering curse on the land, feeding off negative emotions and growing stronger whenever people fought, argued, or despaired. The Pandaren spent thousands of years learning to control their emotions specifically because of this corruption. Their entire philosophy of inner peace and harmony wasn't just cultural wisdom, it was a survival strategy. Show too much anger, fear, or pride, and you'd literally manifest these emotions as monsters that would terrorize your village. The Shah turned Pandaria into a land where negative emotions could kill you, which explains why Pandaren society developed the way it did. For thousands and thousands of years, the Shah remained dormant, kept in check by Pandaren emotional discipline and some seriously powerful magical wards. Then the Horde and Alliance showed up during mists of Pandaria and immediately started beating the crap out of each other on this pristine continent. All that warfare, anger, and pride provided a feast for the Shah, and they began manifesting all across Pandaria like a plague. The story gets even more insane during the Siege of Orgrimmar. Garrosh Hellscream, already corrupted by his own pride and anger, discovers the heart of Yasharaj buried beneath Pandaria. And this absolute madman decides that consuming the heart of a dead old god is a brilliant idea for gaining power. Garrosh consuming Yasharaj's heart might be the most metal moment in Warcraft history, but it also shows why old gods are so terrifying. Even dead for tens of thousands of years, Yasharaj's remains were powerful enough to corrupt one of the strongest orcs alive and nearly destroy both the Horde and Alliance. The heart didn't just give Garrosh power, it amplified every negative emotion he'd ever felt and turned him into a monster driven by pure pride and hatred. The whole Yasharaj situation taught the Titans a crucial lesson. You can't just kill old gods without consequences. That's why they imprisoned the other 3 instead of ripping them out too. They learned that old gods become so integrated with the worlds they infect that removing them is like performing surgery with a chainsaw. You might kill the cancer, but you'll probably kill the patient too. And honestly, Yasharaj's influence still haunts Azeroth today. Every time someone gives in to anger, pride, or despair, they're feeding the same kind of corruption that nearly destroyed Pandaria. The Shah might be defeated, but the emotional vulnerabilities that created them are still part of what it means to be mortal on Azeroth. C'Thun was the old god that got the short end of the stick in terms of storytelling, and honestly, it's not entirely his fault. While Yasharaj was busy being the most powerful and N'Zoth was playing, four-dimensional chess across multiple expansions, C'Thun was just sitting in his underground prison, being a giant eyeball with tentacles. But here's the thing about C'Thun that most players don't realise. He was the first old god that Blizzard had to actually design as a raid encounter, and they had no idea what they were doing. See, C'Thun was imprisoned beneath Ahn'Qiraj in what's now called Silithus, one of the most barren and lifeless zones in classic WoW. C'Thun's corruption had been seeping out of his prison for thousands of years, turning the entire region into a desert filled with aggressive Silithid insects and crystal formations that pulse with old god energy. His servants, the Chiraji, were basically his attempt at creating the perfect insectoid empire. These weren't random bug people either. The Chiraji had a sophisticated civilization with different castes, massive hive cities, and technology that blended organic and mechanical elements in ways that shouldn't work but somehow did. They worshipped C'Thun as their god, which makes sense because to them he literally was, an all-seeing eye that could grant power to his most faithful servants. The Chiraji spent thousands of years building their empire in Silithus, slowly expanding outward and coming into conflict with the Night Elves who controlled most of Kalimdor. And honestly, this is where C'Thun's story gets interesting, because the War of the Shifting Sands was one of the few times in Warcraft history where the Night Elves got absolutely destroyed by an enemy they completely underestimated. The Night Elves, at this point, thought they were unstoppable. They had immortality, powerful magic from the Well of Eternity, and thousands of years of military experience. When they encountered these bug people in the southern desert, they figured it would be a quick campaign. Just march south, kill some insects, and add another victory to their list of conquests. The Chiraji didn't fight like anything the Night Elves had encountered before. They swarmed out of underground tunnels in numbers that seemed impossible. Their weapons and armor were resistant to magic, and their leaders could drive enemy soldiers insane just by looking at them. Worst of all, C'Thun himself could reach out from his prison to influence the battlefield. The Night Elves got beaten so badly that they had to call in the Dragonflights for help. And when beings powerful enough to reshape continents have to intervene in your war, you know things have gone seriously wrong. The dragon aspects worked together to create a magical barrier around Ahn'Qiraj that would keep the Chiraji trapped inside and prevent C'Thun's influence from spreading further. But here's where C'Thun's story becomes frustrating from a lore perspective. The Aspect's solution was basically to build a magical wall around the problem and hope it went away. They didn't try to understand what C'Thun was, where he came from, or why he was so dangerous. They just locked the door and walked away. This worked for about 1,000 years until players showed up in Classic WoW and decided that giant bug people, C'Thun as a raid encounter, was revolutionary for its time, but also incredibly simple by modern standards. He was a giant eye surrounded by tentacles in a circular room, and the fight was basically about not standing in bad stuff while doing enough damage to kill him before he killed you. There was no complex mythology, no elaborate cutscenes, and no deep dive into old god lore. He was just a big scary monster at the end of a really difficult raid. And honestly, that simplicity was probably intentional. Blizzard in 2006 had no idea that World of Warcraft would become this massive, ongoing story about cosmic forces and universe-ending threats. They just wanted to make a cool raid boss that felt appropriately epic for the endgame content. C'Thun was their attempt at creating something that felt ancient and powerful without having to explain exactly what that meant. The whole aesthetic of C'Thun was clearly inspired by Lovecraftian horror and the Eye of Sauron from Lord of the Rings, a giant, all-seeing eye surrounded by tentacles that could drive people mad just by looking at them. It's classic cosmic horror imagery that immediately communicates, this thing is bad and you should be afraid of it, without needing extensive backstory. The problem is that as WoW's lore developed and old gods became more important to the overall narrative, C'Thun got left behind. While Yogg-saron got an entire expansion's worth of build-up, and N'Zoth became a multi-expansion villain, C'Thun remained the simple bug lord with the giant eye. He never got the complex motivations or the deep corruption storylines that made the other old gods feel like real characters. Looking back, C'Thun feels like the tutorial old god. He introduced players to the concept that there were these ancient, incredibly powerful entities buried beneath Azeroth, but he did it in the simplest way possible. Kill the bugs, fight the eye, get the loot, move on. Yogg-saron is hands down the most successful old god in Warcraft history, and honestly, it's not even close. While C'Thun was content to sit in his bug hole and Y'Shaarj got himself killed by being too aggressive, Yogg-saron played the long game and corrupted half of Azeroth without ever leaving his prison. This is the old god that figured out you don't need to break free to destroy the world. You just need to be really, really good at whispering the right things to the right people. The Titans imprisoned Yogg-saron beneath what would become Ulduar in Northrend, and they thought they were being clever by assigning their most powerful keepers to guard him. Mimiron the Inventor, Freya the Nature Guardian, Thorim the Stormlord, and Hodir the Frostkeeper. These weren't just any Titan constructs. These were the elite, the most trusted servants of the Pantheon, being so powerful they could reshape continents if they wanted to. And Yogg-saron corrupted every single one of them. See, this is where Yogg-saron proved he was smarter than the other old gods. He didn't try to break out of his prison or launch massive armies at his captors. He just started talking, whispering, suggesting. The Keepers thought they were immune to his influence because they were mechanical beings created by the Titans themselves. They had no idea that Yogg-saron had already planned for that. Even while imprisoned, Yogg-saron's blood seeped through the ground of Northrend, hardening into an ore called saronite. Saronite is crystallized old god corruption, and it whispers to anyone who gets near it. The undead scourge found deposits of this stuff all over Northrend and thought they'd hit the jackpot. Here was a material harder than steel that seemed perfect for weapons and armor. What they didn't realize was that every piece of saronite they mined, every weapon they forged, every piece of armor they wore was slowly driving them insane. The whispers were so subtle that even beings without minds, like undead soldiers, were being influenced by them. Yogg-saron was essentially turning the Lich King's own army into his unwitting servants, just by letting them use his blood as raw materials. But that's small potatoes compared to what Yogg-saron did to the Titan Keepers. He spent thousands of years working on them, finding tiny cracks in their programming, exploiting microscopic flaws in their construction, and gradually bending their minds to his will. Mimiron became obsessed with creating increasingly twisted, mechanical horrors. Freya started growing corrupted plant life that fed on decay and death. Thorim retreated into depression and rage. Hodir became cold and uncaring beyond even his frost-based nature. And here's the really insidious part. They didn't even realize they were being corrupted. From their perspective, they were just adapting to their roles, becoming more efficient guardians, making necessary improvements to their domains. Yogg-saron's corruption was so subtle that his victims thought his ideas were their own ideas. Yogg-saron also created the Curse of Flesh, which might be his greatest achievement. He infected the Titan forged with a curse that gradually transformed them from mechanical beings into biological creatures. Earthen became dwarves, Vrikul became humans, mechagnomes became gnomes. This wasn't just about making them easier to corrupt, though that was part of it. This was about fundamentally changing what it meant to be a Titan creation. By turning mechanical beings into flesh and blood mortals, Yogg-saron gave them emotions, desires, fears, and ambitions. All the messy, complicated feelings that make mortals vulnerable to manipulation. He essentially turned the Titans' most loyal servants into beings capable of betrayal, corruption, and despair. And then he spent thousands of years whispering to their descendants, slowly building networks of cultists and corrupted individuals across multiple generations. The corruption didn't stop there, though. Yogg-saron's influence reached out through the roots of Nordrassil, the World Tree, and began corrupting the Emerald Dream itself. But what really makes Yogg-saron terrifying is how he influenced major historical events without anyone realizing it. During the encounter with him in Ulduar, players get visions of moments from Azeroth's past that suggest Yogg-saron had his tentacles in everything. The creation of the Dragon Soul, the weapon that nearly drove Neltharion insane. The assassination of King Lane during the First War, the Lich King's torture of Bolvar for Dragon. All of these moments might have been influenced or orchestrated by Yogg-saron's whispers. And honestly, this raises the terrifying question of how much of Warcraft history was actually guided by old god influence. Were the wars, betrayals, and catastrophes that shaped Azeroth natural consequences of mortal ambition and conflict, or were they all part of some elaborate plan by imprisoned cosmic horrors? There's one really weird thing about Yogg-saron, though. He calls himself the God of Death, which sounds badass and intimidating, but it makes absolutely no sense when you think about it. Yogg-saron doesn't practice necromancy, doesn't have any connection to the afterlife or the Shadowlands, and his corruption is more about madness and mutation than actual death. The explanation for why he's called the God of Death basically just stops at because he said so. The whole situation with Cho'Gall weakening Yogg-saron's prison is another one of those random events that's barely explained in-game. Somehow this two-headed ogre mage managed to sneak into Ulduar, one of the most secure facilities ever created by the Titans, and weaken the magical barriers. The how and why of this is glossed over so quickly that most players probably missed it entirely. When players finally confronted Yogg-saron in Ulduar, the fight was everything an old god encounter should be. Sanity mechanics that made you question what was real. Tentacles everywhere, and those historical visions that revealed how deep his influence really went. It was peak old god design, showing both the cosmic scope of their threat and the personal, psychological horror of facing something that could rewrite your memories and make you believe lies. Yogg-saron represents old gods at their most effective, not as brute force destroyers like Yasharaj, but as patient corruptors who understand that the best way to destroy something is to make it destroy itself. N'Zoth is the old god that Blizzard spent over a decade building up as the ultimate mastermind behind everything terrible in Warcraft, and then somehow managed to waste all that potential in the most disappointing way possible. And honestly, that's the real tragedy here, because N'Zoth had everything going for him: mystery, influence, incredible build-up, and some of the most iconic corruptions in the entire franchise. For most of World of Warcraft's history, N'Zoth was the old god hiding in the shadows while his brothers got all the attention. S'thun was the bug lord, Yogg-saron was the corruption master, and Yasharaj was the dead one whose heart Garrosh ate. But N'Zoth was the puppet master pulling strings from his prison in the Circle of Stars, deep beneath the ocean where no one could find him. And the guy was busy. While the other old gods were either dead or fighting players directly, N'Zoth was orchestrating some of the biggest catastrophes in Azeroth's history. The corruption of Neltharion into Deathwing, that was N'Zoth. The cataclysm that literally shattered continents and killed millions, N'Zoth's handiwork. Queen Azshara's transformation into the Naga, also N'Zoth. The guy had his tentacles in everything, but he was smart enough to stay hidden while other people took the blame. Let's start with Deathwing, because this might be N'Zoth's greatest achievement. Neltharion was supposed to be the Earth Warder, the dragon aspect responsible for protecting Azeroth's deep places and maintaining the stability of the world itself. He was literally designed by the Titans to be incorruptible, a perfect guardian who could never betray his duty, and N'Zoth turned him into the Destroyer. The corruption happened slowly, over thousands of years. N'Zoth whispered to Neltharion from his prison beneath the ocean, filling the dragon's mind with paranoia, ambition, and rage. He convinced Neltharion that the other dragon aspects were plotting against him, that mortals were ungrateful for his protection, and that only through destruction could true order be achieved. By the time anyone realized what was happening, it was too late. Neltharion had become Deathwing, and he was ready to tear the world apart. The cataclysm wasn't just random destruction either. It was a carefully planned operation designed to weaken the barriers between the physical world and the elemental plane, making it easier for N'Zoth's allies to break free from their prisons. When Deathwing emerged from Deepholm and started reshaping continents, he was following N'Zoth's plan to create chaos and instability that would make further corruption easier. Then there's Queen Azshara, who might be N'Zoth's most successful long-term project. When the Well of Eternity collapsed and Azshara's highborn followers were drowning in the ocean, N'Zoth made them an offer they couldn't refuse: serve him, and he transformed them into beings capable of surviving underwater. The catch was that they'd become the Naga, serpentine creatures bound to his will for eternity. Azshara thought she was getting a good deal. She'd keep her intelligence, her magical power, and her immortality, just with a new form that could rule the oceans. What she didn't realize was that N'Zoth was playing a game that lasted 10,000 years. He turned her into his most powerful agent, someone with the knowledge and authority to carry out his plans, while he remained safely hidden in his prison. N'Zoth also manipulated the Elemental Lords, convincing Ragnaros and Alakia to serve him in exchange for freedom from their elemental prisons. Here's where things get weird though. For all of N'Zoth's build-up and influence, players didn't actually see him until Hearthstone in 2016, not World of Warcraft, the game where his story was supposedly building toward a climactic confrontation, a card game. The most mysterious and influential old god in Warcraft history was revealed in a spin-off game before he appeared in the main story. And honestly, that should have been a warning sign. When your ultimate villain gets his big reveal in a different game entirely, it suggests that the main development team doesn't quite know what to do with him yet. The Hearthstone team understood that N'Zoth was supposed to be this cosmic horror that brought back dead things and corrupted everything he touched. The WoW team seemed to forget that between Hearthstone and Battle for Azeroth. When N'Zoth finally appeared in Battle for Azeroth, everything started off promising. The expansion began with faction warfare in Kul Tiras and Zandalar, but underneath the surface, N'Zoth and Queen Azshara were manipulating events toward their own goals. Players in Nornund discovered that a massive portion of N'Zoth's physical body was located beneath the Shrine of Storms in Stormsong Valley, which explained why that area felt so wrong and corrupted. The Crucible of Storms raid was actually pretty cool, showing players just a tiny glimpse of N'Zoth's true form and power. But then things started going downhill fast. The whole plan to free N'Zoth involved Azshara leading players to Nazjatar, her underwater empire, and tricking them into breaking N'Zoth's prison with their Heart of Azeroth artifacts. And here's where Blizzard made their biggest mistake. They had players accidentally free the most dangerous old god in history, the master manipulator who had been orchestrating catastrophes for thousands of years, and then they did absolutely nothing interesting with that freedom. N'Zoth breaks out of his prison, steals Queen Azshara away to parts unknown, and then we fight his minions in old zones with different skyboxes. But here's the real tragedy. Blizzard actually had plans for something amazing. Data miners found an incomplete version of Nazjatar, where more than half the zone was just N'Zoth himself. The old god was so massive that he would have literally been the terrain players were walking on. Can you imagine how incredible that would have been? Fighting on the surface of a living old god, seeing his eye tracking your movement, feeling his heartbeat beneath your feet. Instead, they scrapped that idea and gave us N'Zoth as a skybox decoration and a single raid encounter. The final confrontation with the most built-up villain in Warcraft history was basically just shooting him with a laser beam powered by the heart of Azeroth until he died. No complex phases showing his true power, no reality warping mechanics that made you question what was real. Just a straightforward damage race with some tentacles, and then they killed him, actually properly dead. After years of build-up, after establishing him as this cosmic horror whose influence touched every major event in Warcraft history, they just ended his story with a single raid tier. No escape plan, no final twist, no lingering corruption that would continue to threaten the world. Just dead, except maybe not, because during Dragonflight we've been getting whispers that sound like they might be from N'Zoth or some remnant of his power. The problem is that at this point, bringing him back would feel like admitting that Battle for Azeroth's ending was a mistake, which it absolutely was. N'Zoth deserved better than what he got, and honestly so did the players who had been following his story for over a decade. G'huun is the old god that proves even the Titans, cosmic beings of unimaginable power and wisdom, can make absolutely terrible decisions when they're trying to be helpful. And honestly, the story of how G'huun came to exist is both hilarious and horrifying in equal measure. Picture this: the Titans have successfully imprisoned 4 universe-ending parasites, and instead of just leaving well enough alone, they decide to poke them with sticks to see what happens. After imprisoning Y'Shaarj, C'Thun, Yogg-saron, and N'Zoth, the Titan Keepers weren't satisfied with just containment. They wanted answers. Who were these old gods? Where did they come from? How did they become so powerful? And most importantly, was there a way to purify their corruption and maybe turn them into something useful? It's like finding a deadly virus and thinking, I bet we can turn this into medicine if we just experiment with it enough. So the Keepers built Uldir, a massive research facility designed specifically for studying old god corruption. And honestly, calling it a research facility is like calling Chernobyl a power plant. Technically accurate, but it doesn't capture the full scope of how badly things can go wrong when you're messing with forces you don't understand. Inside Uldir, Titan scientists spent thousands of years experimenting with samples of old god essence. They tried everything they could think of to cleanse the corruption, and every form of purification magic they could devise. They tried to isolate the corrupting elements from the beneficial ones, thinking maybe they could separate the power from the madness. They even tried therapy sessions, which is both adorable and terrifying when you think about it. None of it worked. Every single experiment failed to purify old god corruption. In fact, the more they studied it, the more they realized that corruption wasn't just what old gods did, it was what they were. You can't separate old god power from old god corruption any more than you can separate water from wetness. They're the same thing. But here's where the Titans made their biggest mistake. Instead of accepting that old god corruption was fundamentally unpurifiable and stopping their experiments, they doubled down. And that's how they accidentally created G'huun, the 5th old god and possibly the most disgusting entity in Warcraft history. G'huun wasn't born from the Void Lords or hurled across space to corrupt world souls. He was made in a laboratory by well-meaning scientists who thought they could improve on cosmic horror through careful engineering. The result was an old god specialised in blood corruption and decay. While the original 4 old gods each had their own domains, Y'Shaarj with emotions, Yogg-saron with madness, N'Zoth with manipulation, and C'Thun with being a big eyeball, G'huun became the master of biological corruption. G'huun's corruption spread through blood, which made him incredibly dangerous in ways the other old gods weren't. You could resist whispers, you could fight off emotional manipulation, but if G'huun's corruption got into your bloodstream, you were basically done. The infection would spread through your entire body, transforming you into a living weapon designed to spread more corruption to everyone around you. The Titans realised their mistake pretty quickly and imprisoned G'huun just like they had the other old gods, but the damage was done. Thousands of years later, during Battle for Azeroth, the Blood Trolls discovered G'huun's prison and decided that freeing an artificial old god sounded like a great idea. These trolls had already been practicing blood magic and ritual sacrifice, so G'huun's corruption was like rocket fuel for their existing practices. They became his most devoted servants, spreading his blood corruption throughout Nazmir and threatening to turn all of Zandalar into a rotting nightmare. And honestly, G'huun might have the best creature design of any old god in the game. This thing is absolutely revolting in the most perfect way possible. The fight starts with his mouth poking out of a wall like he's some kind of cosmic horror version of a Jack-in-the-Box. Then he bursts himself out of the wall in a sequence so disgusting that it probably traumatized half the raid teams that fought him. During the encounter, G'huun looks like a massive tumor with tentacles, constantly bleeding and oozing while he tries to corrupt everything around him. When you hit him with the laser beam that finally kills him, he writhes around in pain in this oddly adorable way that makes you feel almost bad for shooting a universe-ending horror with concentrated Titan energy. The whole G'huun storyline is basically Blizzard saying even when the good guys try to create artificial old gods, they're still nightmare fuel that needs to be destroyed immediately. It's a perfect example of why cosmic horror works so well in Warcraft. But honestly, I'm kind of a G'huun hipster. Everyone talks about the classic old gods, but G'huun represents this perfect blend of body horror and cosmic dread that makes him incredibly underrated in my opinion. He's proof that even artificial old gods are absolutely terrifying, and his design team deserves credit for making something so thoroughly disgusting that it actually enhances the horror elements rather than just being gross for shock value. And that's every old god that's tried to end reality as we know it on Azeroth. From Y'Shaarj's catastrophic death, creating the Well of Eternity, to N'Zoth's decades of manipulation ending with a disappointing laser beam, these cosmic horrors have been the puppet masters behind nearly every major catastrophe in Warcraft history. They corrupted dragon aspects, created the Scourge's favourite building material, turned night elves into fish people, and somehow convinced Titan scientists that making artificial old gods was a brilliant idea. The crazy part, they might not even be permanently dead. Void Lords exist outside reality, and concepts like death might not apply to their servants the way they do to mortals. With whispers in Dragonflight hinting at their return and new threats potentially lurking on the other side of Azeroth, we might not have seen the last of cosmic horror in World of Warcraft. Whether that's good or bad depends entirely on whether Blizzard learned from Battle for Azeroth's mistakes. Because honestly, after over a decade of build-up, N'Zoth deserved better than getting killed by a giant laser. But that's World of Warcraft lore for you. Brilliant cosmic horror concepts, executed with the consistency of a drunk goblin handling explosives. Sometimes genius, sometimes catastrophic, but never boring.